Hi there, welcome. My name is Daniel Peabody. I'm a director here at Elizabeth Leach Gallery in Portland, Oregon. We're here today to talk about our current exhibition by Jeremy Okai Davis titled Black Wood, featuring new paintings. You're seeing a few of them behind me currently. This exhibition is on view through October 31st. The Elizabeth Leach Gallery has represented Jeremy since 2019, and we are very excited to have this first exhibition. And it is my pleasure to welcome today the artist, Jeremy Okai Davis. We're also really excited today to have Larry Ossei-Mensah with us. He is a native of the Bronx and a Ghanaian American curator and cultural critic. He's organized exhibitions and programs at commercial and nonprofit spaces around the globe, from New York City to Rome. Prior positions that Larry has held include senior curator at the Museum of Contemporary Art Detroit, and he was a contributor to the first ever Ghanaian pavilion at the 2019 Venice Biennale. I know that myself and Jeremy had the pleasure of meeting Larry when he visited Portland, and I think in 2014, or maybe it was 2015. But we are excited to welcome both of you here today and look forward to this conversation. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that beautiful introduction. Thank you for the invitation to be in conversation. Thank you to Daniel, Kathleen, Elizabeth Leach Gallery, and Jeremy for inviting me to be in this conversation. It seems like it was yesterday when I was in Portland, and I think it might have been like five years ago. But that experience has left an important impression on me. And so I'm excited to be in conversation with Jeremy to share a little bit of light on your practice generally, but really do a deeper dive into this exhibition, Black Wood, and really just help people get a sense of what's inspiring this work. How does this relate to the I guess long tail of your practice, and maybe some insights into what you're thinking about in the future. So Jeremy, are you ready to rock and roll?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, cool. So I guess, I always try to approach these not assuming everybody knows your background,
Hmm.
where you're from. And so I guess my first question, just to give people a general sense, is, so you're from North Carolina, correct?
Yeah, Charlotte,
Um,
North Carolina.
how did growing up in Charlotte, not only influence you as a person, but influence your practice? Because how long have you been in Portland now?
I moved to Portland in 2007.
Okay.
So yeah, so a lot of my like growth as an artist has happened since being in Portland. To be honest with you,
Okay.
it's like speaking of Charlotte and like how it influenced me as a kid. Like my main thing was basketball. That's
Okay.
what I thought I was going to be. I thought I was going to be an NBA basketball player. My dad was a high school basketball coach. My uncle played in the NBA. My cousin played in the NBA. So I just had this idea that that's what I was supposed to do. So I
Uh-huh.
did. So I played a lot of basketball, but all at the same time I was making art. I drew like most kids do. I like drew like Transformers and GI Joes with my brother, and um, but I just kept drawing. Like I think at some point kids stop, I just kept doing it. And that was like a thing that I had on the side that wasn't really like a public thing for people. It's just something that I did. It was probably in high school that I was still playing basketball, but in high school I got into an art class that and my teacher there, Hans Kelly Somi was his name, really uh, championed me being an artist. Like he gave me a lot of confidence. So I just really started focusing in on it a little bit more. So basketball and art were kind of 50-50 at that point. So I
Okay.
was going on this path of still being a basketball player. I actually got a scholarship to play basketball my freshman year in high school or freshman year in college at a little junior college outside of Asheville called Brevard.
Okay.
Yeah, so so I played 1 year there, and it didn't work out the way that I was hoping, the way I envisioned, because
Mm.
college basketball is it's a different breed.
Yeah, yeah,
You're
yeah.
waking up early, you're like 2 a day practice, study hall. You just don't have any time to like do anything else. And
Yeah.
I wanted to do art. I was actually in the art program at Brevard.
Okay.
Um, and when basketball didn't work out, that's when I decided to kind of switch gears and I moved back to Charlotte and got in the art program at UNC Charlotte.
Okay.
Um, Met some other artists right away, that were doing like portrait work and painting and doing really cool stuff. So that's when I was like, I should just do this art thing. I should just do this painting thing. So I went kind of full force once I got to UNC Charlotte, and got my degree in about 4 years of being there. But yeah, Charlotte as a whole, like the city, growing up, it wasn't really like an art city. I didn't go to a lot of museums. There's a place called the Mint Museum that I went like on field trips with school, but I wasn't even that into the art that was there. Um,
Okay.
my art interest really came from, like, as a kid, really came from uh, like magazines, like the Source magazine always had like the illustration at the back. I don't remember the back page. Always had that
Okay.
crazy illustration. So I would see those, just different illustrations in magazines that I was like really into. Seeing some of like the really like bright colors, like Hype Williams as a hip hop video producer. Like I love the coloration in his work, and I would try to recreate that in my paintings. So just
Mm-hmm.
hip hop was like a big part of my uh, deep dive into like art and culture. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I think I wanted to like do illustrations for musicians and do or I guess at that point like tape covers and records. Like I would see records when I go to the record store. So yeah, it wasn't necessarily the city that influenced me. It was actually like looking outside of Charlotte and like looking
Got
at
it.
what was going on outside of Charlotte and outside of
Got it.
North Carolina that
Got it.
really
But
influenced me.
but I think just that note is interesting, and we'll do a deeper dive into the current show. You know, you talking about magazines, and Jet magazine being an inspiration for a lot of these subjects.
Hmm.
You talking about album covers, for example, and like some of the images that you've selected, remind me of like it could be a jazz album cover or like a hip hop. Well, probably like jazz.
Jazz, yeah,
I
yeah.
would say like 50s, 60s, 70s. It was more maybe 80s. A focus on like the vinyl album cover that like was an extension of whatever the music was.
Hmm.
And I see a musicality not only in how you um the composition, but then also just how you render the
Hmm.
image, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Um, and then so lived in Charlotte, moved to Portland. Um, what drew you to portraiture specifically as a modality of expression, exploring ideas, asking questions, but then also trying to attempt to answer questions, filling gaps?
Like
Um,
the the easy way to say it, like when I was in college, I was doing a lot of more like postmodern work. Like I was looking at, like, I love David Sally. Like I loved his
mhm,
work. A lot of
mhm.
pop art. I was really into that, and all of
Okay,
that work had elements of figuration in it, um,
got it.
that I loved, and I would do that, and I would also like juxtapose it with like just random stuff, like real kind of irreverent like juxtapositions of images. And then after graduate, and when I was in Charlotte and trying to work and make bodies of work, I was trying to figure out a way to do like 10 paintings that fell in line with each other. And the
Mm,
easiest resource I had at that point were these photos that were on my dad's computer that I took and I blew up and just like made them larger. And when I looked at them, I saw this kind of pixelation. And this kind of goes
mm,
into how I got to the style the way I paint people. But I saw this pixelation in the images, and I taught myself to paint people using these like little dots of color. That's almost like an homage to Chuck Close as well. I love Chuck Close, Lucian Freud, Alice Neal, all use this type of painting that didn't blend really. Like there was like element, like colors that you have to use your mind and your eye to kind of put together. So that's where the style came from. And I've just always been really interested in uh, portraits, like painting people. When I was a kid, one of the first art books I found, like, just I think I was in high school, was oh, I'm forgetting the woman's name now. I can't remember her name, but she just like a old like early 1900 like painter. Um, I'll remember it during this conversation. But I had like, it was just around the house and it was all portraits, and I would just flip through that every so often. So I always had this like interest in portraiture. Um,
okay.
and that's just what I use as a vehicle for getting the message, whatever message I'm trying to get out. If it's not a straight portrait, there's elements that kind of come and go that are portrait based. Yeah, just always had an interest in portraiture.
And then I guess when you're making the portraits, at least now, what's your process like? So with this particular show, Black Wood, one, I'm curious where the title comes from, and then, well, let's start there, and then we'll kind of get into like the inspiration for these, because I'm curious.
The title, so the pieces, when I started them, like I'd been thinking about, like the last show I did was this show kind of referencing Shirley cards and that history. We could talk about that later as well. But in starting this work, I was kind of continuing that idea of using these Shirley cards that Kodak used to calibrate film. But in doing that and in doing some research on subject matter, on subjects that I wanted to use for it, um, I came across all these Jet magazine covers that had these women that were either models or actors, musicians that, and reading the articles, I had like this like, man, why don't I know about these people? Like, what is there this hidden Black Hollywood that like I wasn't privy to, or that people weren't privy to? So Blackwood is kind of a homage to this underground Black Hollywood that people weren't aware of. That it's like I'm kind of making it up. Like I'm making it up. Like I'm just trying to basically course correct and uh, let people know that there was this other thing, these like really talented, influential people, women in the world doing like really great things that didn't necessarily get the shine that they deserved at the moment. So
And can you talk a little bit more about the Shirley cards? Because I was doing some research and I was listening to an interview, and there's a gentleman, I think, who works in the processing plant, and he says they still use the Shirley cards to neutralize the color, and I was just like, how is that a neutral color?
yeah,
And
you know,
so,
I don't know the ins and outs of like the actual like film industry, like how they do it, like in the labs. I just know when in doing my research, I found out about Shirley cards maybe in 2013 or so. Um,
okay,
and it's just been in the back of my mind. Like I would see them, and if you see them, they're really graphic. Like
okay,
just the image, the color bars, the black and white like clothing, the singular figure, usually a Caucasian, or back the ones I was referencing were just a Caucasian woman, and they were used to calibrate the film. So from the start, like there was a disregard for other skin tones. So when I did that body of work last year, it was called The Presence of Color. I was basically course correcting Shirley cards and creating these Black Shirley cards. So again, I took images from Jet magazine and Ebony magazine and some more popular people, some less popular or less known, and putting them in place of that Caucasian figure, just to, and again, course correct and show like there's more, there's more than just what people are aware of.
so what? Because so you did the series last year. You obviously did the series for this show. I mean, were there things that you learned or just kind of surprised you just through the process of doing research? Because like even like you're very intentional with the subjects that you've picked. Some of them are titled with the names of the subject. Like you have Aisha Davis, um, Nellie Hill, uh, Marlene Fitzhugh.
Fitzhugh, yeah.
Um, so I guess, were there any insights or illuminations? One, and then two, and I guess this piggybacks on you wanting to kind of highlight these underrepresented voices. But why was it important for you to include the name and like the naming so people know who these people are and they're not these anonymous kind of figures?
Um, I guess just there's been a lot of anonymity for
Mm,
Black people over the years. a lot of not knowing the names and not
Yeah.
seeing the faces. So I wanted to make sure, like some of the square format images, the ones that are all called black wood with the name after it.
Yeah.
Some of them are popular people.
Yeah.
Most, like Marlene Fitzhugh and Iris Smith, when I was doing research, I couldn't find anything else on them, to be honest. Like
Mm.
I think Marlene was a model in Chicago. She won like
Beauty
a
contest.
beauty pageant. And Iris Smith, I think, also was a model or was a kid in Harlem, and she won a beauty pageant, and I think got to travel to Paris for it. So I didn't want it just to be an image of a black woman. I wanted to make sure that there was a tie-in, that these were actual people. These were people that lived a life, um, that did great things. I, in looking at them, when I looked at the actual magazine covers, I just thought like these were young people, like in their early 20s, maybe late teens, making it to Jet magazine. It seems like it should have been, and maybe it was, but it feels like it should have been something that was more celebrated. And I think about, if it was more celebrated back then, the influence that that could have had on other people that weren't on the cover, that would just see it come through the see it on the newsstands, or get it, or coming through the mail or whatever. Like seeing kids, like if kids could get that and see that I too could be on the cover of a Jet magazine, or even if it wasn't Jet magazine, if it was like some of these other magazines that are out there that weren't just necessarily targeting African Americans. Like, I guess I just wished, in doing the paintings, I keep saying course correct. I'm basically trying to course correct and trying to inform people now that there was something happening back then that was really important. There were people that were doing really important and powerful things. So including the name seemed.
But I
Uh,
think it's interesting when I think about all the September issues that were released this year. You
oh
know,
yeah.
you had, Amy, who did Vanity Fair cover with Breonna Taylor.
Hmm.
I mean, it seemed like every magazine had a black woman on the cover. Um, was that something you saw as you were making these works, or did that register? Or is that, how do you think about that now, where it tends to be celebrities or people who've had unfortunate circumstances that are celebrated? Um, in my mind, is like, is this a paradigm shift, or is this just kind of like a trend? So how
Uh,
do you think about that in converse to like the source material that you were pulling from a magazine that was committed to Black life,
yeah,
African
yeah.
American life?
Um, we talked a little bit a couple days ago about that, and I was thinking since then about uh, Amy Sherald's cover, and I loved it. I thought it was beautiful, and I know there was some pushback
Mm-hmm.
from some people about it. But I think any time that black faces, black women can be on the cover of a magazine that's seen by the masses, I think it's a positive. It shines a light on whatever topic um, is within the magazine, or what the story is about. I think that's really important to do. And it could be a trend. I hope it's not.
Yeah,
Um, I hope it just I hope it continues and isn't necessarily just when a tragedy happens. Like I hope, like, I mean, I don't I hope that commonplace achievements are celebrated, continue to be celebrated, along with tragedy being highlighted and injustice being highlighted. It needs to be a whole scope. Like, we
yeah,
can't just be uh, showing our face in public, in magazines and media, when it's an injustice, because I think that itself does a somewhat of a subjugating of black people. Just seeing ourselves in those moments, and just in those moments, is a negative. Um, so I don't know. I wasn't necessarily thinking about that cover when I was doing the work. I think I had started the work prior to it. That happened. Um, Unfortunately, happened. The event happened before I started the work. The covers happened uh, during the process. So that didn't really cue into
yeah.
what I was doing.
And to piggyback on process, can you talk to us about, and I think this is your opportunity to nerd out if you would like to, like the actual process of creating these paintings. So is it you find an image, create a sketch, or do you find an image, go right in?
My process, it changes from project to project.
Okay.
This one, like I keep a sketchbook. My sketchbook isn't necessarily small versions of the larger paintings. My sketchbook is really like just a bunch of ideas just thrown in, like anything that comes to mind. Some sort of graphic elements, like the hoops that are in Toulouse at the top. Like I'll just do like a quick like loop and like with different colors and like, oh, that's interesting. Like, see, I wonder how I can incorporate that into a piece, or split the splitting of the portraits. I do a lot of drawings where I split like the top and the bottom and just play with different compositions in the sketchbook. And when I'm working on a project or working on a body of work, I'll open the sketchbook if I'm stuck and like um, hold it up to the piece and say like, can this work in the piece? Can this like I use the sketchbook as basically like a testing ground for things that could potentially end up in larger pieces. I have many sketchbooks of ideas that haven't even been touched. So the the images, how I select images, though, like with this project, I knew that I wanted to use images from Jet. Like I got this stack of Jet magazines, so I knew I wanted to use those. So there's a lot of sketching involved initially in the sketchbook of the people. A lot of just, in my mind, looking at the magazines, looking at the people on them, and thinking like,
Mm,
would I enjoy blowing this up? Like,
mm,
how exciting would it be to try to recreate this mood or feeling for this person is exuding in paint? Um, a lot of the images that I use are black and white, so the practice of trying to turn them, colorize them, basically, is
mhm,
really important to me and a lot of fun to do. To like look at the scale of shade and relay that in color. Um,
mhm.
it's a lot of fun. There's a lot of different elements that come into play when I'm actually working on the pieces that are on top of the actual point and meaning of the piece. There's the I love painting. Like that's first and foremost. I just love painting. And I love
Mm,
looking at other painters and looking at other artists. So just the act of doing the painting is probably 50-50 with or maybe sometimes more than the actual subject matter a lot of the times.
okay. No, it's interesting because I was having a conversation with another painter, and they were just talking about paint as this alchemic material.
Mm,
You just like, whether you're, big kind of gestural strokes or kind of more tight, moving your hand kind
hmm.
of strokes. And so it's always interesting to talk to painters about just the act of painting,
Yeah.
and beyond the subjects being African American women, just the politics within like choosing to paint as an African American male painter.
Mm,
What does that imply when you think about a canon that hasn't always been inclusive? Um, but I also be curious to hear more about Aisha and Toulouse, because these are the two paintings where you've obscured
mm,
the subject.
yeah.
Um, but the eyes, I'm looking at it now. If I'm, let me see something. Well, so you obscured the eyes on Toulouse, but with Aisha, the eyes is what pulls you in. Can you talk about like formally what informed that choice, and then that has the color bar, which is kind of more traditional color bar, where like the other one is, I would call it almost this Olympic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. So Toulouse and Aisha are paintings of, they're both the same subject as Muriel Smith.
Mm-hmm.
She was a musician and actress in the 1940s, 50s, I think also a little bit in the late 30s. Um, in doing my research, I found out about her. She was actually in Moulin Rouge, the original Moulin Rouge,
Oh,
um,
wow.
which is about Toulouse-Lautrec. So that's where the name Toulouse comes from. And her character was Aisha. That was the character. She just had a small role at the beginning. But the main thing that she did in the movie was she was the ghost singer for Zsa Zsa Gabor.
Mm.
So there's a couple different numbers in that movie that she does, and another movie called South Pacific. So her voice is in the movie, and it's like this wonderful scene of Zsa Zsa Gabor like just being real boisterous and out and doing this thing, but it's a black woman's voice that she's using. So obscuring her eyes in Toulouse and just showing her mouth, showing the bottom portion of her, was my way of showing that they used that part. They used her
Mm.
voice, they used her mouth
Mm.
in the movie,
Mm.
and
Mm.
didn't allow you into her soul by using her face, like
Mm.
her eyes, the entryway. So that was
Mm.
the thinking behind eliminating that. And then the bars, the Olympic bars that look like Olympic bars, I got a record of hers. I bought it off of eBay, and the old like RCA, I think it's an RCA logo or some sort of record logo. It had these loops, these like little hoops like that were in different colors that
Mm.
reminded me of the Shirley cards.
Okay.
So I just wanted to like pay homage to her recording history by using those at the top of that piece. And
Mm.
then with Aisha, that's the top has the top over with the blue background and the black and gray at the bottom. That was her character's name in the movie. And in that movie, there's a dancing scene that she has with a white actress, and they're kind of going back and forth, and it's almost like this push and pull. She gets kicked at one point, and she's like yelling at her. There's this battle that when I was watching that scene, it felt like a tug, like a tug of war for her and her role, like really
Mm.
trying to like portray that role as much as she could in this little chunk of time. So that's why I used the eyes. Like I wanted that to be like uh, uh, an entryway into her role in that movie. Um, so that was the thinking behind those two pieces. So Aisha and Toulouse are not a diptych, but they're meant to be viewed or thought about as a pair.
Yeah, I mean, I read them now. You know, you pointing that out. I mean, I read them almost as bookends of sort.
Mm.
Um, and then I guess you talk about music, you talk about magazines. How much does cinema, if at all, either influence this project or influences how you think about composition? Because I think what's also beautiful about these women that you've depicted in your work is that you've made them heroic, or these
Mm.
heroines, you know, which I find to be really refreshing, right?
Yeah.
It's you've I don't want to say reclaimed, but you've embraced these images, these women, these icons. At least in my view, and it seems in your view as well. How important was it to have them register as heroic and not just beautiful, but just like as you mentioned before, individuals who made a difference, they contributed.
Mhm. Um, Cinema doesn't play a big role in my work typically. With these
Okay.
pieces, a number of Muriel Smith obviously was an actress, so um, I watched Moulin Rouge, that original Moulin Rouge, just to get a feel for the era and for that time. Nellie Hill, who's in one of the square format pieces with the yellow background, she was an actress. She was actually she was a musician and an actress, a singer, and she's in some of the original. I'm forgetting the name. I think they're called talkies, like the
Yeah.
original like music videos,
Hmm.
and a lot of like. So I watched some of those old videos. So just to get a feel for the person that
Yeah.
wasn't just this like two-dimensional magazine that I was pulling from. I wanted to like watch some of them in action, like moving and talking. There's actually some good stuff on YouTube of Muriel Smith visiting France, I think it was, um, like, and being welcomed with open arms in France. And uh, so cinema doesn't necessarily play a part in the ideas, but for this body of work, I wanted to look at the people walking and talking. Like I wanted to see them in action as I was working, so that I could like almost impart that energy into the pieces, to make them less of just this two-dimensional thing and actually a three-dimensional walking and talking, uh, breathing person.
Yeah, and I think that segues perfectly to Sepia,
Mm.
because I think that's the most visually different
Yeah.
from all the works in the show, and then you know, you're very intentional in using the word sepia in there. You
Hmm.
know, so you may not know what the show is about, but you know this it definitely has to do about color in some regard.
Yeah.
So can you talk about that painting, just like some of the formal decisions that you made? I look at it as this picture within the picture, but then also, you know, you have these, you know, for lack of a better word, these pixels, these
Hmm.
dots, um, which is something that, you know, you can see in a photograph, or you can connect to a photograph, but you also can connect to television.
Yeah.
So if you could talk a little bit more about that, and what does sepia represent for
So
you?
Sepia is a painting. The subject of that painting is Dorothea Church, who was a model. Um, and Sepia and Model and Charm, those two paintings were started at the same time. And they started with this kind of sepia toned uh, wash of walnut ink that I
Okay.
did. Both of them just like real gestural. I think I was listening to music and just like kind of going wild with like just whatever happens with the sepia colored paint. But then also in my research of her, she appeared on Jet magazine. She appeared on Ebony, and also on a magazine called Sepia, where that's where the text comes from. The font choice is from that magazine. But yeah, that piece is about Dorothea Church, and it is the most visually different, I think. But it was the one that I had the most challenges with, and
Mm,
uh,
why is that?
just because I started with the sepia and then I did the portrait of her in
Okay.
the middle of it, which is kind of breaks a lot of rules when it comes to just like putting a portrait right in the middle of the canvas. Kind of
Yeah.
throw everything off. Like what you do next, you have to balance. Like you have to keep trying to balance and put these things. So um, I think that was the first piece I started, but it was also the last piece that I finished. Like I work on everything like at the same time. So
Mm,
the dots in the bottom left were there. The top right was incomplete. There was nothing up there. Well, I had the word sepia written up there, and it just looked really imbalanced. So that's when I decided to put the dots in the top right as well, which are basically like a zoom in of pixels. She was a model, but also she modeled in uh, the magazines that I mentioned. But she in Paris, France, she was the first. I'm trying to remember, she was the first Black model to work with French designers.
oh
Um,
wow.
yeah, which is crazy. Like a lot of the stuff I looked at it at first. People that were the first to do things. Black people that were the first to do things. So that's why I wanted to paint her. And in researching about her, when she came back to the States, I think she was in New York, and she was looking to model for Ebony, and she wanted to wear some of those fashions that she had been modeling with that French designer, and he told her that she couldn't because he didn't want basically the clientele for Ebony magazine wasn't the clientele that he wanted. Um, so after spending all this time in France and doing big things, she came back to the States and was automatically kind of like uh, subjugated basically in what she could do and what she could wear. Um, so I kind of went off topic of what you're asking, but that's the story behind Dorothea Church.
So I think as you're doing the research on these different women, did you find that that was kind of a consistent narrative where like they were able to go abroad, you know, develop these almost larger than life personas, you know, model for different houses, you know, be in plays, movies,
Yeah,
talkies, and then come back to the States and then kind of be rendered, you know, almost like these Shirley cards, neutral.
definitely. Yeah, that's definitely something that was in mind when I was researching the people. And um, Diane Dickerson, another one. She's in another one of the square formats. She wasn't a movie star or musician or anything. She was the daughter of Earl Dickerson, who was an attorney, and he was a big attorney in Chicago for civil rights. Um, so she was the daughter of him, so very well known and uh, a socialite. Like she was out like partying, going to restaurants, nightclubs. And there's one story that I read in Jet where she got turned away at a popular restaurant in Chicago after having a reservation with her fiance at the time. Even though she was this popular person, this beautiful woman, black woman, she walks into a place that she should be accepted based off on her status. She still gets declined and turned away because of her race. So that's why she ended up in the pieces. But yeah, there was Muriel Smith is another one. She traveled to Paris and garnered acclaim there. And it made me think a lot about, in doing it, about James Baldwin, because Baldwin also has the history of getting out of America. Like he had to get out of America, and he went to France, and in France he felt like a person. Like that's where he went
Mhm.
to feel like a person. So it made me
Mhm.
think of like seeing these women have to do the same thing.
Yeah.
Made me think a lot about James Baldwin. So it was a common theme. It was definitely a common theme in doing research on these people.
Now, can you talk a little bit about Bounce, a dark horse? Because it
Yeah,
looks like she's holding some type of
it's just
card or
yeah.
something.
Yeah, Bounce, that's the only piece that is not based on the Jet magazines. I actually found these images at the dump, it was at the city dump. I was doing a project last year, commissioned through this, or a residency through this project called Glean, where we were given access to the city dump
Oh,
and had to make work based off of what we found. I found this stack of photos. Uh, and this black woman was one of those photos, and in the picture she's holding a white card, and it's not necessarily a bounce card which you use in photography to bounce light
yeah.
onto the subject, but that's what I saw it as. The person taking the photo was trying to calibrate the photo, and they were using this stark white card to do that. So I just thought that um, even though it wasn't the Jet magazines, and I think that photo's from the late 70s, so a different era, it kind of informed the idea of the difficulty that Black people had in being accepted. Like this beautiful Black woman still has to hold this white card in order to be photographed, in order to be recepted. Um,
Mm,
so that was my thinking with that piece.
mm. And then, I think we'd be remiss to not acknowledge, the fact that this exhibition is happening in Portland, Oregon.
Mhm.
Um, why was it important for you to show this work at the gallery at this particular time? And then you're also specifically focusing on Black women. What did you feel was imperative or urgent to communicate with this body of work that you've committed or
Um,
created?
yeah, urgency is a weird thing. Like I didn't feel urgency in doing it.
Okay.
Um, I feel it's definitely timely. What I'm working on is definitely a timely thing, but it's also a thing that I want to make sure um, isn't just of the moment, if
Got
that
it.
makes sense. Like I want to make sure, like I started working on work that focused more on myself as an African American, my community, my people, probably in 2015. Really kickstarted into 2016
Yeah.
with Trump being elected, and just a lot of injustices being highlighted. So this work is just a continuation on that. It's not necessarily about a specific time right now. It's something that I hope can be kickstarted uh, and just continue.
Got it.
You know what I'm saying? I want to make sure that it's not a trend. Like what I'm doing is not a fad. Um, I don't want to be looked at in this canon of Black artists that are doing something right now. Like just I want to make sure. I don't know. It's hard to explain what I'm saying. Like I want to make sure that the work I'm doing um, is viewed years from now and still
Hmm.
has uh,
Resonant.
resonant. Yeah, still relevant. So the subject matter is Black women. There's the Breonna Taylor case that's on everybody's mind. Hopefully, still on everybody's mind. Um, but I want this work to be seen 10 years from now and to be something that's uh, influential. Um, and powerful, as powerful as this is now, years from
Mm,
now. So,
mm,
um,
mm.
yeah.
Dope. Quick questions about Marlene and Nelly.
Okay.
Because these seem to be the two paintings that don't visually have a color bar, but as I'm studying it, and tell me if I'm reaching, I feel like you're beginning to kind of break the color bar apart. Because I'm looking at these red dots, and I'm
Yeah.
still thinking about color bar.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm looking at Nelly's hair
Her hair, yeah.
on the right side of the body, where you have this kind of blue.
It's like a wash of blue. Yeah.
Yeah, there's like a gradient of colors that are occurring that make me think about these color bars. So are you thinking about,
Oh
am
yeah.
I reaching,
Yeah.
or is that?
No, I wanted the color bars. I wanted to be included in all the pieces, but I also wanted to kind of, like you're saying, like break it apart. You know what I'm
Got
saying? Kind of dissect that color bar. So yeah, Nelly, the color bar appears in her hair, but it's like this wash. Like I started those pieces on raw canvas as opposed to gessoing. So the wash that I did in the red and yellow, green and blue uh, kind of blended, and that's where I started with that piece, and then I like started working on the subject, and I wanted to make sure that that popped out. And yeah, in Marlene, the dots are almost that representation of the color bar. um, and that one, like if you see it in person, they're not painted. uh, it's they're stickers that
Oh
I've had
wow,
for a long time, so yeah.
that's
um,
crazy.
yeah.
Because
So
then it's kind of interesting, because thinking about, like, then that shifts the read for me, because I think about the red dots, when you sell a piece,
mhm,
right? And then even for me, thinking about this current climate where there's a lot of figurative work that is within the zeitgeist that's being consumed, and there's these interesting dialogues about, is that the commodification of these bodies, but then conversely, it's like, I haven't seen in my lifetime this much, fine art that's representing these different kind of voices, perspectives with
yeah.
regard to Black folks. And so,
Mhm.
I mean, was that something that you thought about at all with Marlene, or that just kind of was more a gestural move?
That was more of a gestural move, but I love that reading of it, the red dots with the sold sticker. I'll probably take that. I'll take that and run with it. But yeah, no, I wasn't necessarily thinking about that, but I do think a lot about uh, putting African American subjects on gallery walls and
Yeah,
making that more of a commonplace
yeah,
for people to see.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, that's always on my mind. Like
Mm.
I think a lot of people were influenced by Kerry James Marshall, and he
Yeah.
has that. He's been doing that for a long time. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so a lot of artists have that in the back of their mind or in the front of their mind, is the let's get black faces out there. So that's definitely on my mind with the work. Like I want to promote uh, black faces as much as possible these days.
Mm. And then I guess, what do you want audiences, because we live in a climate which is kind of interesting, where, like, some people will be able to physically see the work, and then other people will see this work virtually.
Hmm.
But thinking about the audience in Portland, it's safe to say you kind of came of age as an adult in Portland. What do you hope people kind of consider? Like, I don't even want to say walk away with, but think
Hmm.
about maybe questions they may ask when they experience the show or when they see the show.
Um, I like with my work, I just always want to bring uh, our existence into light, um,
Mm,
and almost in a like our prominence into light. And
mm,
so that's first and foremost. And then secondly, depending on the body of work, I want them to see the work. I want them to be attracted to the work as much as possible. So I like uh, uh, fidelity, like to the subjects, making sure it looks like the people making sure they don't look crazy on the wall is really important to me. Making sure they look strong and powerful is really important to me. And I want people to come away from it and want to do more research, like want to know more. Like when they see these people, like, who is that? Like, find out the name, go research it, find the jet cover, maybe find the actual magazine, open it up, read some articles about like our people. Realize that we've existed for a long time. Realize that there's been injustices done to Black people, people of color, for years and years and years, that aren't necessarily front page news. You know, like I want people just to one, know that the things that are happening now have been happening for a long time, but also realize that we've been powerful for a long time. Like we've done really important things for a long time. So I just want people to walk away and just be moved by the work, be moved by the history of the people, our people.
That's amazing. And so is this, do you intend to keep going with this series, or you just kind of want to let it rest for now and then kind of just see what comes up for you?
Yeah,
Or
I mean, I don't know if it like directly from this series. I think some of the square format paintings, I'm more than likely going to do more of those because I have like mini jet magazines with images that I want to paint. So I think those will keep coming into play. But the next body of work is still processing like what it's going to be. More than likely will be in line with what these pieces are. Maybe a different focus. But we'll see. Yeah, I'm still like I just finished that work like 3 weeks ago,
okay,
so
it's
I'm
still
sitting
very
back.
fresh.
Yeah, it's fresh, and I'm still trying to figure out my next steps. So
Okay,
um,
and then I just want to go back to bounce just one more time, just so for folks who are watching, this is also just another example of you deconstructing the color bar when you look at the second piece. So you have the figure in the top, and then and actually, what's interesting with this diptych, um, basically that's a fully abstracted, you know,
the second piece.
piece.
Yeah,
Yeah, which is kind of interesting to see like the color bar. I don't want to say fractured, but you know, fractured for lack of a better word. But then you still have this circular gesture,
yeah,
this this wholeness, which I think is kind of interesting. And it's exciting, you know, to see that you've considered everything, right? Because like
mm,
typically with exhibitions, you know, there's a tendency to just kind of produce a lot of paintings,
yeah,
right? And not really kind of provide space for each piece to really kind of tell you a story, share something with you, but then also vibrate, right? Because that's
yeah,
something that has been on my mind recently, is just thinking about this vibratory capacity that painting has.
hmm,
Right? Not just necessarily the image, but just also the choices and colors that you've employed,
hmm,
and how you know, as David Sally says in his book, I think How to See, how you touch the canvas,
mm,
right? And so that's exciting to see, and you know, hopefully I get an opportunity to see these paintings in person.
yeah, for sure.
But I want to thank you for spending time chatting with me. Blackwood, it's on view at Elizabeth Leach Gallery till the end of October. Make sure you check it out. And thank you for this conversation and just sharing more about your work, your process.
Yeah,
I've learned something. And again, thank you to the gallery.
yeah, I appreciate it, Larry. Thanks for doing this.
My pleasure.
Yeah,
This has been such a rich conversation. I so appreciate you both taking the time to talk together with us and with our audience. And thank you, Larry, so much for doing this. And Jeremy, thank you for these great paintings. We're so enjoying living with them. Thank you both. This has been great.